Hi, it's Saturday and I'm going to start off from where I left the last continuous Oxford video, which was at the New Road end of Bullock's Lane. I'm going to go back up Bullock's Lane to George Street and then talk about George Street. Before I do that, let's just admire the County Council offices, County Hall, as a sample of Oxford architecture. Right, that's enough admiration. So I'm now climbing the steps that I went down last time. And I think most of what is around me is St. Peter's College buildings. That's its Sino Milia Court. I did wonder at first whether, given the meaning of sin, implying together, it might be some sort of conference centre with a space set off for people to talk together. On the other hand, it may just be the name of whoever funded the building. Coming up to Canal House, which is the house of the Master of St. Peter's, and which is where the canal engineer used to live. Looking towards Nuffield on the left. Got to be careful not to slip here because these are very slippery and it's just been raining. And I'm approaching George Street. Now, I was thinking when I came to Bullock's Lane last time that George Street is quite unpleasant in a number of ways. And Coincidentally, a friend of mine was saying much the same thing. So I thought I'd try to work out why this is and do a little video on the unpleasantness of George Street. And I think I found quite a few reasons. And this isn't just me being self-indulgent. Here's a quote from the travel writer Bill Bryson, Notes from a Small Island, which is about part of his time in this country. And he writes of Oxford, "You tell me that it is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. I'm afraid not. It is a beautiful city that has been treated with gross indifference and lamentable incompetence for too long. And every living person in Oxford should feel a little bit ashamed." I've known that quote anyway, but I was looking up George Street. Bugger, sorry. Something large, heavy and wet has just landed on me from above. I was looking up George Street to see what other people had said about it, and found an article called "The Sad Decline of Oxford" by Alexander Lahrmann in The Spectator, 25th of May 2024. It says, "The cliché is that Oxford is the most beautiful city in Britain. Poets and writers have immortalised it. Evelyn Waugh did in Brideshead Revisited, and Matthew Arnold in his poem Theosis. He writes, "That sweet city with her dreaming spires.
One voice say hello.
She needs not June for beauty's heightening." In other words, he's implying that most places need the summer sun in order to look beautiful, or at least to be more beautiful, whereas Oxford is so wonderful on its own that it doesn't need this. It's lovely all year round. Well, let's go and see whether it is lovely or not. Okay, I walked to the end of George Street. I'm now facing Worcester Street, bottom of Walton Street. And this is one of the unpleasant features about getting to George Street. The crossing is very badly timed. You have to wait for ages before the traffic will stop. And if you're carrying a heavy load or it's raining, that is not a lot of fun. You may argue that I'm not complaining about George Street itself, but I'm not concerned only with architecture. I'm also concerned with things like noise and general convenience. This crossing is not convenient. Neither, by the way, is the one further up the road at the top end of Gloucester Green. Okay, so I'm now coming onto George Street. Well, there's at least one closed shop here, or closed building, and it seems to have been closed for a long time. Nobody, as far as I can tell, is doing anything to renovate or reuse it. This scaffolding is a pain. I know it's likely only to be temporary, but it makes the pavement uncomfortably narrow, and because of the crowds of tourists, the pavement is already uncomfortably narrow. One often gets pushed off into the road by tour groups. That looks to me very much like vomit, which hasn't been cleared up. And I'm not in the habit of photographing vomit, but it's reminiscent of something else that Lahmann, the Spectator writer, writes in The Sad Decline of Oxford. And he's writing it about George Street having, as he puts it, the many sins against design and good taste, which the police once described longingly as a haven of vomit and violence. There's something peculiarly unloved about the three-storey building at the right-hand end opposite. I can't put my finger on it, but it's just unattractive somehow. That view into Hyde Bridge Street is pretty dreadful. That 1908 building is handsome in its own way, and looked at from the side, from that direction, it has an attractive curve, and it looks nice seen on the edge of the street. But from here, it's too tall. You can't step back enough to avoid feeling overpowered by it. Cafe Opium looks as though it's closed, and it's shabby. The windows are scruffy. In fact, the windows are dusty, and they've got writing in the dust. I can see Spank. There's scribbles on the door. The business college above, somehow, I don't know, it doesn't look like a first-rank institution. It looks like a place that you wouldn't go if you had the money to go anywhere better. I don't know what you call the space between a window and the ground, or whatever you call it. That space in Cafe Opium is scruffy as well, and it adds to the appearance of dereliction. Sinfully good food is filthy. The building to the right of it, as I've already said, is closed and is just sort of unpleasant. There must be studies on the psychology of architecture that tell why it's unpleasant, but it is. The pavement is patchwork. Trying to get past this A board is unpleasant when there are crowds because the pavement's not wide enough. Likewise, trying to get under this scaffolding. And in the last few seconds, the sky has turned grey over to the west and the chilly wind has sprung up. And I have to say that everything around me enhances the feeling of chill and gloom rather than helping dispel it. There's nothing warm or loved or loving about this part of Oxford. There's what looks like another closed business. And I don't know whether that kosher cafe is still going, but it doesn't look very welcoming either. Very narrow pavement again, making it hard to avoid umbrellas. I think the best thing about drinking in the Four Candles is that you don't have to look at it. Go inside. Of course, this doesn't help either. I know the cinema has a purpose, but isn't very attractive. Couldn't they at least have slapped some Art Deco decoration on it? That STA shop in the distance says, "Start the adventure." Well, how? It seems to be closed. And I think it's been closed since 2018 or so.
Okay, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm going to get the bus, so I'm going to go the other way.
watching people go past, I think I can make an analogy between George Street and their clothing. Almost everyone is wearing blacks and greys, which do absolutely nothing to make the day feel any brighter. I don't know why the British hate colour so much, but they do. I may be an exception because that's what I'm wearing. And the same applies to George Street. It's dressed in drab. And apparently, officially, about a third of days in Britain are overcast. No, that can't be right, sorry. Maybe a third of days see the sun. Yeah, that's more likely, isn't it? 2/3 are overcast. Whatever, there isn't a lot of sun. And so we need architecture and surroundings that make the most of whatever light there is. Whereas these people's clubs and the surroundings and buildings in George Street both suck life from it. I think the rain has slowed down to the point where I can go out without ruining my equipment. No, not yet. But while I'm here, have a look at that. I presume it's some sort of junction box or wiring box which is full of phone cables or internet cables. Whatever, whoever looks after it hasn't bothered too much about keeping it clean. It looks as though it's been home to generations of posters and they've just been rather roughly scraped off. An even better analogy, perhaps, is what I believe used to be called monkey feet. Round about the 2000s, flared trousers came back for the first time since the 70s. And there were lots of people who wore quite long bell-bottoms, jeans, which were completely unsuited to this sort of weather because they were so long that they trailed in the water, and you would see people waiting for buses and so on with water that had sopped up in their trousers and gone up all the way to the knees. You could tell this because the denim was a lot darker when it got wet. And somehow George Street feels as though it's doing the same sort of thing. It's actively attracting the grimness that happens from time to time around it, and making the worst of it.
I know, it's a shame. Shame either. Don't.
I can feel the sun. The sun is coming back in the west now, which is great. Okay, so let me risk going out in the open. Until fairly recently, this part of George Street was even grimmer, because there was some guy who was sleeping in the open and who would spread a big duvet on the ground every night and sort of nest in the middle of it. That speaks of neglect too, neglect of people, because it's a terrible waste of a life not to be able to get better facilities. So STA Travel had closed up, and so has whatever this is. I think it may be Jamie Oliver, may have been Jamie Oliver. There's this sort of carelessness as well. I think this is just running the water directly into the street. And the space by the new theatre also looks scruffy, and generally it has at least one person nesting under it, spending the night under it. I think that guy is there for most of the day. Those green things are never cleaned. And those walls there are pretty brutal. And then we have what is currently probably the worst thing about George Street, Debenhams, which has just been allowed to fester. The space goes all the way round to a side entrance containing a huge zigzag staircase by the bus stops, and the entire premises are just empty. And have been for years. This is bad too, but I need to get to the other side of the street to show it properly. And that brings me to this crossing, which, like the one at Walton Street, is on for pedestrians for far too short a time, so you end up waiting in big crowds. I'm lucky this time. Well, no, I'm not, because it's good. So here we have Debenhams. And there we have what used to be National Westminster, which I don't think the Nat West part, the ground floor, is being used for anything. There we have Cherwell College, which is one of these tutorial colleges that supplements sixth form education for A-levels and so on. And it's a reputable enough organisation, but again it just looks scruffy. If I saw an actual picture of their premises on a website, I'd think about going somewhere that was cleaner and shinier and better maintained. Well, I'm going to cross back to the other side of George Street again.
Big wall of screen with multiple different graphics up. So one of them is lifestyle.
And while it may not be very clear from this video, The street does have a nice curve to it, and the big red brick building at the far end has been sited with some care. So there are good things about George Street, but altogether it's a mess. I'll see you next time, hopefully in drier conditions.